You've said it before, probably more than once. And she smiled, said thank you, and something quietly closed behind her eyes. You meant it. That part was never the question. You looked at her and something in you wanted her to feel it, to actually feel it. And so you said the most natural thing a man says when he wants a woman to know she matters to him. And she received it, politely, warmly even. And then the moment passed, and neither of you knew quite why it didn't land the way you intended. Here is what most men never find out. There is a version of that moment that goes differently. Not because of how you look, or how confident you are, or how long you've known her. It goes differently because of what you say. Specifically, because of which words you choose. And the ones that actually reach her are almost never the ones men default to. What I am going to show you in this video are 8 specific phrases that work where the usual compliment doesn't. Not because they are clever, because they speak to a different part of her entirely. By the time we reach the last 2, you will understand something about female psychology that most men spend a lifetime never quite grasping. She has heard it hundreds of times, from men who meant it, men who didn't, men she loved, and men she barely knew. By the time you say it, even sincerely, her nervous system already has a filing system for it. This is not a criticism of you. It is simply how repeated experience works on the human brain. When a phrase is heard enough times across enough contexts, the emotional response to it gradually flattens. Psychologists call this habituation, the process by which a stimulus that once produced a strong response begins to produce a weaker one simply through repetition. It is the same reason a song that once moved you can eventually become background noise. The feeling doesn't disappear because the song changed. It flattens because your brain stopped treating it as new information. You're beautiful has been said to most women since they were small girls. By parents, by mirrors, by movies, by men who wanted something, and by men who genuinely meant every word. And because it has been said in all of those contexts, loaded and neutral, sincere and performed, it has lost its ability to create distinction. When you say it now, she doesn't hear your specific noticing of her. She hears a category, a familiar sound placed in a familiar slot. What she is actually waiting for, without necessarily knowing she's waiting for it, is the feeling of being seen past the surface. That is the difference between a compliment she thanks you for and a compliment she thinks about later. And that gap, small as it sounds, is where connection either forms or doesn't. So if "you're beautiful" reaches her ears but not her chest, what is actually the difference between a compliment she forgets and one she remembers 3 days later? There is a moment, you have probably felt a version of it yourself, when someone says something and you think, they actually get me. Not that they like you, not that they find you attractive, but that they see something specific and real about who you are. That moment has a biological signature. And it is very different from the one triggered by, "You look great." When a person receives a compliment about their appearance, the response tends to activate the reward centers of the brain in a brief, relatively shallow way. It feels good. It produces a small lift. But it does not activate the deeper neural regions associated with emotional bonding and felt understanding. Those regions, particularly in the areas of the brain that process personal identity and social recognition, respond to something different. They respond to being known. What behavioral researchers have observed, particularly in studies on female relational bonding, is that women form stronger emotional connections through recognition of their internal world than through recognition of their external appearance. This doesn't mean appearance compliments mean nothing. Of course, they carry weight in the right context, but they operate at a different depth. A compliment that says, "I see how you look," lands in one place. A compliment that says, "I see who you are," lands somewhere far harder to reach and far harder to forget. This is the foundation beneath everything that follows. The 8 phrases I'm about to give you are not scripts. They are not techniques. They are simply different targets, the kind of targets that once you know where they are, you can't stop seeing them. Which brings us to the first phrase, and the reason it works has almost nothing to do with the words themselves. The first shift is subtle, but once you feel it, you can't unfeel it. It is the difference between complimenting what she arrived with and complimenting what she built. The first phrase targets something she did, not something she is. When you notice a decision she made, how she handled a conversation, the specific way she set something up, a choice she made that required more thought than it appeared to, and you name it out loud, something different happens. She doesn't receive it as flattery. She receives it as evidence. Evidence that you were actually paying attention. It might sound like, the way you handled that situation earlier, I don't think most people would have thought to do it that way. Specific, observational. No exaggeration, no performance. Just a quiet acknowledgement of something she actually did. The reason this lands so differently is that it cannot be said to everyone. You're beautiful can be said to any woman who walks into a room. This cannot. It requires that you are watching. And women, in ways they are often not even conscious of, track whether the men around them are truly present or simply going through the motions of attention. The second phrase moves one layer deeper. It names something she navigated, a difficulty she handled with composure, a moment where she could have unraveled and didn't. It sounds like, I noticed how you kept things steady when that got harder than it needed to be. That's not a small thing. Not praise for the outcome. Recognition of the effort beneath the outcome. You might be wondering, doesn't this risk sounding like you're grading her? And it can, if the tone is wrong. The difference is in what you're doing with your face and your energy when you say it. Delivered as a quiet observation rather than an evaluation, it lands as intimacy. She feels witnessed, and being witnessed for most women is far more affecting than being admired. Those two phrases work on what she does. The next two go somewhere more private. They work on how she thinks. Most men compliment a woman's looks. Fewer compliment her achievements. Almost none compliment the actual texture of how her mind works. And that last category is almost entirely uncontested territory. What makes a woman feel genuinely understood at the level of her thinking is not being told she is smart. Smart is another category word, another phrase that has been applied broadly enough to lose its edges. What actually reaches her is when you reflect back something specific about how she sees the world. Not that she sees things well, but that she sees things in a particular way that is distinctly hers. The third phrase sounds like, the way your mind went there, I genuinely hadn't looked at it from that direction. You are not agreeing with her. You are not complimenting her conclusion. You are naming the route her thinking took and marking it as specific and interesting. This is a meaningful distinction. Agreement feels social. Recognition of perspective feels intimate. The fourth phrase is rarer still. It names a quality of her thinking that most people have probably never articulated to her directly. Something like her ability to hold two contradictory things at once without forcing resolution, or her tendency to ask the question no one else in the room thought to ask. It sounds like, there's something about the way you sit with complexity without rushing to an answer. I don't see that very often. Now, before you move toward using either of these, there is one thing worth being honest about. These phrases only work if they are true. If you say them without having actually noticed what you claim to have noticed, she will feel it. Not immediately, perhaps, but women have a finely tuned capacity for detecting the difference between recognition and performance. The phrases themselves are not the point. The noticing behind them is the point. These are just the words that let you deliver what you actually saw. The next two phrases move into quieter territory. They are for the things she holds but rarely shows, and the reason they work is almost uncomfortably direct. There are things a woman carries that she has learned, often through experience, that most people either won't notice or will use against her. When someone names one of those things, gently, without making it a big moment, something shifts. The fifth phrase targets a quiet strength, not her visible accomplishments, the kind of strength that doesn't announce itself, the steadiness she maintains when something is harder than she lets on, the patience she extends when she is running low on it, the way she keeps showing up in situations that have stopped giving back to her. This is what you are naming. Something like, I think you carry more than you let people see, and I think you've been doing it for a long time. This lands differently from anything before it because it is not a compliment about a quality she performed. It is a recognition of something she thought was invisible. And when something you believed was invisible gets seen, the response is not gratitude. It is something much closer to relief. The sixth phrase operates on a different mechanism. It acknowledges a moment of vulnerability she offered, not by calling it vulnerability, which would make it feel exposed, but by naming it as an act of trust. It sounds like, what you shared with me about that, I want you to know I don't take that lightly. You are not analyzing her. You are not commenting on her feelings. You are simply marking the moment as one that mattered and reflecting back that she was safe in offering it. Of course, this phrase requires context. You cannot deploy it without the moment existing first. And it should not be said immediately after she shares something. That reads as reactive, almost mechanical. It lands better when it comes slightly later, almost as an afterthought, as if you've been sitting with it. That timing is not strategy. It is simply how genuine processing works, and she will read the difference. Remember what I said at the beginning, that there is something you have been saying your whole life that you believe is working, and it is quietly doing the opposite of what you intend. We are closing in on the full answer to that now. The last two phrases are the ones almost no one uses, and the reason they work is the same reason they are so rarely said. This last category is the one almost no one uses, not because it is difficult, but because it requires something most compliments don't. You have to have actually been paying attention. The seventh phrase describes what changes when she is present. Not what she looks like, not what she does, what happens to a room, a conversation, a dynamic when she enters it. This is not flattery. Flattery names qualities. This names effects. It sounds like, something about the way you show up in a conversation changes the temperature of it. Things get more honest. I've noticed that. You are not telling her she is wonderful. You are telling her she has an effect on the world around her that is real and specific and that you have observed directly. This lands at a depth that appearance compliments cannot reach because it is not about her in isolation. It is about the relationship between her presence and everything around her. It says, I was watching not just you, but what you do to the space you're in. That is a level of attention that most people, if they are honest, have never received. The eighth phrase is the most uncommon of all. It names what she makes you feel in a way that reflects the credit entirely back onto her. Not, I feel happy when I'm with you. That centers your experience. Something closer to, there's a steadiness I feel around you that I didn't know I was looking for until I noticed it was there. You are naming an effect she produces without making her responsible for your emotional state. The distinction is subtle, but it is everything. One reads as need, the other reads as recognition. Used together, these two phrases do something the previous six do not. They place her not just as someone who has admirable traits, but as someone whose existence has a measurable effect on the world and on the specific person she is with. That is not a small thing to feel. That is the thing most people spend their lives hoping someone will eventually notice about them. Now that you have all 8, there is one more thing worth understanding before you use any of them. Used well, any one of these phrases can create a moment she remembers. Used at the wrong time, in the wrong tone, the same words become something she notices, and not in the way you intended. The timing question is not complicated, but it is real. Early in a connection, before trust has formed, some of these phrases will feel presumptuous rather than perceptive. Phrases 5 and 6 in particular require that she has already offered you something. You cannot name what she carries quietly if she has not yet given you access to it. Used too early, they don't land as insight. They land as an attempt to accelerate intimacy before it has been earned. The tone question is simpler. Every phrase on this list should be delivered the same way. Quietly, without announcement, as if you are simply saying something true that has been sitting in your mind. The moment any of these becomes a performance, the the moment she can feel you delivering it, it stops being a window and becomes a mirror. She stops feeling seen and starts feeling managed. The phrases are not the thing. Your actual attentiveness is the thing. These are just the language that lets you express it. There is one failure mode that overrides everything else, and it is this: inauthenticity. If you say the seventh phrase to a woman you have not actually been watching, she will not be able to explain exactly why it feels hollow, but it will. The phrases work because they carry the weight of real noticing behind them. Without that weight, they are just words. And words without weight are something women have been navigating their entire lives. What we have covered in this video comes down to one idea beneath all 8 phrases. The compliments that actually reach a woman are the ones that prove you were present enough to see past the surface. You're beautiful is not wrong. It is simply aimed at the most visible part of her, the part she already knows about, the part she has been told about since childhood, the part that requires nothing from you except eyes. The phrases we've talked about today require something more than eyes. They require attention. They require that you were actually there, actually watching, actually listening, not waiting for your turn to speak, but genuinely taking her in. That shift, from observing to witnessing, is what changes how she experiences being around you. Not because you said the right words, because the right words proved something about the quality of your presence. You have those 8 phrases now, and more than the phrases, you have the understanding underneath them. You don't need to memorize a script. You need to pay attention in a different direction. The words will come naturally when the noticing is real. Which of these 8 do you think you've been closest to saying? And which one surprised you most? Tell me in the comments. I read every one of them, and I'm genuinely curious where this lands for you. If you want to keep building this kind of understanding, subscribe, because on this channel, we stay close to the things that actually matter in how men and women connect, and we stay away from the shortcuts that don't hold. In the next video, I'm going to show you something that confuses almost every man it happens to: the moment a woman goes quiet right after things felt the closest. What that silence means, why she does it, and what it tells you about where you actually stand. That one's worth staying for.